Welcome to Scrolling to Death. Today I have former teacher, speaker, author, mom, and the Screentime Consultant Emily Cherkin. Hi, Emily.
Hello, Nikki. Thanks for having me.
Of course. And oh my gosh, there's so much we have to talk about. And you wrote an incredible book that we're going to get into. But first, just generally, you're helping parents manage and balance screen time in their families by becoming tech intentional. And I want to know what that term means to you specifically.
So tech intentional is a term I coined myself. It is, to me, means using technology in a way that is in alignment with our values, developmental milestones, age appropriateness, and resisting, limiting, and delaying any types of tech that interferes with that. That's a pretty mouthy definition. So I always say my TLDR is later is better, less is more, relationships and skills before screens. That's it.
So we want to talk about why we need to be tech intentional. And I think for a long time, parents and families and society thought, tech is great. Our kids are going to be digital super learners and and this tech is going to help us get so much more done and make us smarter and more productive and all these things. And unfortunately, it's not exactly how it's gone. So first, we're going to go through a few of the harms. Are these tech and digital platforms that our children have access to, are they generally safe in today's society?
I mean, short answer, no. And that is because, so let me back up 1 second. I always say I'm not anti-tech. I'm tech intentional because I see the benefit. I see there are some pretty incredible things we can do with technology, like a podcast interview from different states, like there are amazing, amazing things. But the way that it is currently built and designed is counter to what is best for children. And I'm speaking of products and platforms designed for children. So, or quote, designed for children.
Designed.
Manipulatively designed for children. And, so I see that there is a conflict that until the business model is not as lucrative or, shiny and appealing, until that changes, tech will not ever be safe for children. Digital tech, online, I mean. So, again, like listening to an audiobook, okay. If it's a parent controlling the device, that's different. But I'm talking about any app or product that a child uses.
Yeah. And adults mostly use tech as a tool, right? We're using it now as a tool. We use it to connect and be productive. But for children, it's really hard for them to use tech as tools, specifically because a lot of these software and apps have been built to be addictive to them and to keep them on for as long as possible. Can you talk about that addiction? You hear a lot about kids having like tech addiction or social media addiction. And what about these platforms is addictive to children?
Well, sure. That's built into the design features themselves. Sometimes we hear it described as persuasive design. I think the word manipulative tech is more accurate because it has the word manipulation in it. And it is designed to tap into the neural pathways of children to release the dopamine that makes us feel good, want to keep playing or tapping or swiping. And then it reinforces it. So in order to get that same feel good hit, we have to use it again for longer. The reason that this is so different for children versus an adult, and again, this is just so important, I think, for all of us to understand, is that the brains are not fully developed. That prefrontal cortex in the front part of our brain isn't fully developed till we're well into our 20s or even 30s. So when I say adult, I'm talking, let's say, over 25. So up until 25, young people, children, their brains are much more susceptible and vulnerable to these manipulative design techniques. So fundamentally, it is not the same when an adult sits and scrolls through Instagram or a child does, because their brains are not the same. So like that piece alone. The other thing, I think you use the word tool, and I agree, but what I always say is like a smartphone is a Swiss Army knife. It's not a switchblade. It's a multi-tool. It doesn't do one thing. It does many things. And even though we use it for tools and convenience and communication, we also really use it as a way of consuming passive entertainment, right? I mean, I think social media is that in a lot of ways, or streaming.
Yeah.
And for children, one of the fundamental problems is when you use digital tech, especially in the classroom, if you hold up an iPad and you ask any child, what is this? They're not going to say it's a tool. They're going to say it's a toy.
Games.
Yeah.
Right.
And so when the primary function of the device is viewed as entertainment, as is an iPad for a child, they will never look at the iPad as a learning tool, even though adults might want them to. So that's fundamentally at odds with both what's being done and what we expect children to see it as, if that makes sense.
Mm-hmm. I can't wait to talk about screens in the classroom. I think I'm going to save that for the end.
Okay.
We have our own experiences there. But, when we're giving our kids access without intentionality to a lot of these addictive apps and tech, you quoted Lenore Skenazy in the book. You said, or she said, a child who thinks he can't do anything on his own eventually can't.
Yes.
So can you talk about how our children's use of tech without intentionality can limit their development of their skills that they need to work through difficult moments in their life?
Yeah. And I'll say first that I don't think children should be expected to manage their own tech use because, again, they lack the skills and brain development to do that. That's an adult responsibility. Yeah. And what's happened is something called displacement. And I write about this in the book. Dr. Doug Gentile did a lot of research on this, which is this, it's very obvious when you say it out loud. It's just literally time you spend on screens is time you spend not doing other things. So, input, output, right? And the problem, what we know is that the amount of time that children spend on things like free play, outside time, time with friends, non-structured activities has changed dramatically over the generations. And Dr. Gentile's research sort of looks at 1950s till today. And in the 50s, it was something like 68 hours a week that children had in free play. And those of us who grew up in the 70s and 80s had a pretty free range childhood, as Lenore writes about. But that's dramatically changed. Now what we're looking at is maybe 10 hours a week that kids have in unstructured time because so much of the quote unquote free time has been displaced by the amount of time they're on tech. And we know that between 8 and 18-year-old, I think Pew's most recent research is like 7.5 hours a day. That is outside of school time. So if you do the math, I mean, how many hours are left? And if you sleep, eat, I mean, it's pretty dire when we look at those numbers.
Right. Okay. And you said in the book, screen time can kill boredom. And why is boredom so important for kids to experience?
Yeah, boredom is the birthplace of creativity, and it's like we think boredom has gotten such a bad rap. Like we think of it as this thing that needs to be fixed because we've been told that boredom is bad by the tech industry. I mean, they need to find a way to occupy our time because time equals dollars to them. And so, you're standing in line at the grocery store. Well, here, you can catch up on email or you can scroll through your social media. Like we feel compelled to fill that time with something. I mean, even just think about boredom. I was thinking about this the other day, like waiting in the dentist office, like there are no magazines anymore, because everyone's on their phone. The assumption is you're going to have your own phone. So sometimes I'll bring a book just to be rebellious, just to see like what happens if I pull a book out rather than a phone,
But people look at you like you're an alien.
Yeah. But the fact that we have adapted and accepted that so quickly is pretty mind boggling. We're talking like 10 years. I mean, it really isn't a long period of time that this shift has become normalized. And I'm resistant of that. Do I do it? Yeah. I look at my phone sometimes in line. But again, I'm an adult. And when it comes to children, what we really need is that hands-on, tactile, messy, free play with multi-age children and no adult supervision. And that Lenore will tell you all the same things, right? That's a scary thing for parents. And that, in my mind, is a lot of the work that we have to do as parents is, I write about this in the book too, this idea of scary versus dangerous. I don't know if you were going to bring that up, but
I am.
Yes.
I loved it. Yeah. So, and because it comes up for me, the scary versus dangerous conversation, so many parents are strapping a watch on their kid at like 3, 4, 5 years old. And for me, I'm seeing that's out of fear that the child will be abducted or when walking home from school or something like that, which isn't very likely to happen. So we're reacting to a fear by introducing technology when, in your opinion, we should be reflecting on like what's scary to us and what is dangerous. So
Exactly.
Can you explain that a little bit more?
Yeah, that's exactly it. So I hear all the time, well, I need my kid to have a watch or a phone so if they don't get lost on the way home from school or, God forbid, they don't get kidnapped. But the problem is we're worrying about the wrong thing in my mind. And I talk about this as a dichotomy between what is scary versus what is dangerous. And what we think is as scary, of course, is like kidnapping. That is a very scary thing. But is it dangerous to all children? No. Statistically, it's nil. I mean, I wrote about this in the book, if you want your kid to be kidnapped, you'd have to have them stand outside every day for 750,000 years to be guaranteed of being kidnapped. And when you kind of hear it like that, you're like, oh gosh. But important part of this is for parents to realize that why is it that we have that fear? And it's because of our own consumption of devices and clickbait news stories and social media videos that make us feel like the world is a more dangerous place. And Pew Research recently did some, I think this was last year, they found that the top 3 parental fears in America were bullying, youth mental health, and kidnapping. And that makes sense to me when I think about the information I get as a parent, both media and real world. And the problem is one of those things is not like the other. Because when we worry about kidnapping, if kidnapping is our top 3 parental fear, we should be talking about a kidnapping epidemic in our country, and we're not. But we have a mental health epidemic in our country for youth and bullying epidemic.
Right. Yeah.
And so that to me is a great illustration because what's happening is parents go, I got to give them a phone so that they don't get kidnapped. And in doing so, inadvertently, well-meaning parents make number 1 and number 2 worse. Youth mental health and bullying are going to be exacerbated by the presence of internet-connected phones and devices. And so, again, I'm very cognizant of not blaming and shaming parents because that does not make us a better parent.
Right.
But I do say it's not your fault. It is your responsibility. Like we all make mistakes. When we know better, we do better. And so that means maybe needing to revisit the reasons why we chose to give the internet connected tech to our younger children. For whom are we giving it? Is it for our anxiety about the world? Or is it really something else, which I'm skeptical?
Yeah. Okay. And I want to touch on empathy. And I think that comes in when you mentioned bullying and some of the mental health issues. You said in the book, building empathy comes from face-to-face relationships, practicing skills, making mistakes, and seeing the whole person. And in my experience, I'm seeing and covering a lot of stories of horrible treatment of other children through the screen.
Yes.
And so I want to share a story about one of the children I learned about, but can you speak to how these anonymous platforms, social media, gaming has hindered the development of empathy in children today?
Yeah, because that's a really great question. The problem with the screen is that we feel safe behind it. We feel powerful behind it. We feel like you can't touch me, you can't make me stop. But if we take I'm remembering one of those late night hosts would read the mean tweets about celebrities out loud to the celebrity while they were on the show, which is kind of brutal. And but it's a really impactful exercise when you think about how much more difficult it is to say those exact same words out loud, right? Even just to read a mean text out loud, but let alone to say it to someone's face and watch their reaction. Now, children don't always interpret social cues in the same way. And in a lot of ways, kids are really struggling with that. So there's certainly a lot of work to do around that. But when we give them devices where they can hide, deny, pretend to be someone they're not, all of these horrible things that we hear about, then the accountability part is much more difficult. How do we figure out what happened? And the other problem with, putting things on writing and in video is there's a permanence to it. First of all, it never goes away, but also the potential for misinterpretation, right? I used to, when I taught 7th grade, I'd always talk about sarcasm as such a difficult way. Some children have a very difficult time understanding sarcasm. I mean, understandably. And that's why it always made me really mad when adults were sarcastic to young children because they don't always get it. And the problem is if I write you a text that says, nice shirt, and you could read that any number of ways, right? Nice shirt, right? So we lose the eye contact, we lose the tone, we lose all of this stuff, especially in the written part. And so, so it's deprivation of experience that deeply affects children's ability to learn how to read other people, how to interact. And I assume, again, you'll talk to Lenore about this, is that the parents have a responsibility to provide children with opportunities for real world connection. Because if we think they're quote unquote safer by being indoors online all day, that's not true. We need to find opportunities for them to be with other children where they can practice these skills.
Right. And you said in the book that children today are actually much safer even in the real world than any previous generation. So they're not more unsafe when going out in the world.
Right.
And one story I just have to tell because for me it was the harshest example of how this anonymity that children are growing up with and these violent games and how that plays out into teenage years. And Emily Murillo was 17 and she'd been viciously cyberbullied for years. And her mom tried everything to report them to Snapchat, mostly through Snapchat and Instagram, to report these kids. And it just went on and on and on until Emily died by suicide at 17. And then they had to have, this was during COVID, so they had to have a virtual element to the funeral.
Oh.
And so they did it on Zoom. Hundreds of people joined from around the country. And the bullies hacked the Zoom and posted pornography, chanted Emily's dead, posted pictures of corpses, threatened to blow up the funeral home. Like, and you said, you know, these kids behind the screen feel like you can't make me stop. And it's, I mean, Emily's mom was like, you already killed her. Like, why are you doing this now?
That's pretty
and
awful.
That's just, to me, it's like, I have a hard time rationalizing that behavior. But then when you think about some of these kids that have been spending most of their time on screens and violent games with anonymity since they were 4 or 5 years old on, you know, on tablets at home, it doesn't rationalize the behavior.
It explains,
but it gives me
it doesn't excuse.
Right.
Exactly.
Right.
And, you know, that is unbelievably cruelty upon cruelty. And, you know, I have taught my children, and as a teacher, I use this phrase all the time, that hurt people hurt people. And, you know, I know there was pushback to that. But to your point now, like, there is a reason that those people, those young people, I mean, they're children still, made those choices. And a lot of the problem with digital tech and internet and all of the stuff that kids are watching and consuming is that it normalizes behavior that is in the real world unacceptable. That again, you imagine putting that into a real world context, like having to physically show up at a funeral and do that. I can't imagine those kids would ever do that, right? Because it's scary and real, right?
Yeah. Well, and they weren't held accountable either. So you have a lack of accountability.
That's a different problem. Absolutely. Right. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And, you know, there's a lot of parent blaming and shaming. And this is, it's the problem too. I mean, and I see this just sort of globally and politically and statistically, like it's become a very black and white, but, you know, good and bad, all or nothing. And that problem is there is so much nuance to to these issues. And again, that is an atrocity that should never have happened. And you know, horrible. And what else? I mean, what led to that point, right? Like what was the buildup? What were the experiences of these other young people that that behavior was tolerated, accepted, encouraged, right? And that, you know, that's the adult accountability part. You know, what are we teaching children about our use of comment threads? You know, are we trolling? Because
so that's a good transition because, you know, let's talk about some advice for parents now. And we've definitely set the stage on being tech intentional, which comes with delaying and all the things we talked about. But when we talk about practical advice for parents and when it comes to healthy tech use within the family, it actually doesn't start with the child's behavior, does it? It starts with the parents. So can you speak to that?
Yeah. And again, like I said, it's not your fault. It's your responsibility. And it is all about being the role model because you want to know what kind of a tech user your kid's going to grow up to be. It's what you do. It's how you do it because they're watching you. And, you know, it's okay to make mistakes as an adult. Like, and in fact, I think it's really valuable as a parent to say, gosh, I learned something. I'm doing it a way that I don't think is actually great role modeling. And I'm going to change my behavior because I want to, my job as a parent is to teach you what it looks like to be a good human. So 100% it starts with parents. And again, one of my favorite strategies to talk to families about is this idea of living your life out loud, which is narrating. You just narrate what you do as you do it anytime it comes to digital tech. But P.S., it could totally work for anything else in your life. And it builds great skills. So it would be like I'm reaching for my phone. I'm finding out what time soccer practice starts. I'm going to see if there's bad traffic because I'm going to open my Google Maps. Like you're modeling how this is a Swiss Army knife, not a switchblade, right? You're showing all of the different multi-tool aspects. You can also articulate the emotional component. Like, oh gosh, I'm standing in line at the grocery store, at the dentist's office, and I'm bored. And so I'm reaching for my phone in this moment of boredom. And I don't know that scrolling through Instagram makes me feel better. I wonder what else I could be doing. So it's all about our behavior and our use of tech first. And I always tell parents, you know, it's working when the kids are rolling their eyes at you. And I would, I mean, I can be a I like to sort of play it up and be overly dramatic because then my kids get, especially teenagers, they're like, oh, you're so cringe, mom, right? Which is great. I feel like if they're using slang with me, it's, a victory. But we have to, I always say to parents, we want to replace the judgment with curiosity, because there is very few things in parenting that are so fraught as technology and screen use. And so I think a lot of times parents feel a lot of guilt and embarrassment, shame about their own use. And so it's kind of like, well, if I use it and who am I to say? Kids hate hypocrisy, but we can model different behavior. We can make different choices. So living your life out loud is one of my favorite ones. And the other one I would say is get your phone out of your bedroom. There is no excuse to have your phone in your bedroom at night. Adults, I'm speaking of adults. If you don't want your 13-year-old to have a phone in the bedroom, you shouldn't have one in your bedroom.
Wow.
And that's an easy fix. Alarm clocks are really cheap and they aren't internet connected. And, parents are always like, oh, but what if it's an emergency? Put it outside your bedroom door. I mean, literally make it, just add some friction so that you don't roll and scroll in the morning. Or before bed.
Yeah, I just interviewed a 21-year-old who he's a grooming survivor, and he told a story about being groomed at 12 and 13 years old, but he says that he leaves his phone out of his room. And I was like, that's so incredible. Thank you for sharing that.
Yeah.
And I'm glad you're challenging parents around that. One term that I learned about that I don't like, the name is weird, but phubbing.
Oh yeah.
H-U-B-B. So I experienced this, and I'll let you explain it, but I'll paint the picture. I'm in our, back to school night, and the teacher is in front of us doing her presentation, and she's literally in the middle of her presentation, and she keeps getting dinged on her watch, and she keeps looking at it and scrolling on it in the middle of her presentation. Now that's, one example, but also you can be sitting across from someone at dinner and they're not listening to you because they keep getting messages and staring at it on their phone. I cannot stand it. And it's been getting worse and worse.
So that's a perfect example of how living your life out loud can be the antidote, right? Because phubbing is phone plus snubbing, and we've all experienced it.
Okay, that's what it is.
Where we're like talking to someone, and all of a sudden, like their phone makes a noise, and they look down, and they're not listening. And so, what I do when that happens now is I just stop talking. I just wait, and I'll do it to my teenager now. I'm like, I can tell you're not listening, and he's like, no, I am, and I'm like, no, I know your brain physically can't do that, so I'll wait.
Yeah.
But I want you to know that I'm noticing this. And so when we live our life out loud, you start to realize how many times people are phubbing you. You start to realize how many times people use their devices and aren't even necessarily aware. I mean, that, as a former teacher, like, that's appalling, right? Like, and maybe
I know. I was like, what's happening?
You like, okay, maybe it was an emergency, but then she should say that and excuse herself, right? Like, it's one of the problems I see with the watches too. I mean, the irony is that, like, while a phone might have more capabilities, it's something I can actually leave in the other room.
I know.
But the watch is on the person. And, that's one of the things I really worry about with the young kids using them. Parents will say, oh, yeah, my kid doesn't have a phone. They just have an Apple Watch. And it's like, in my mind, I think that's actually worse because it's always on and the temptation is always there. And what we want is to give them opportunities. This is my third TLDR, the skills before the screen. What do they need? If you're really worried about them walking home alone from school, which, by the way, children have been doing for generations, eons, literally. And I will say that the biggest risk to them is traffic safety when they have a device. Because if they have a phone and are how many kids do you see walking home from school looking at their phones? The biggest safety threat in that moment is crossing a street and not looking up, right? Like, so, you can talk to the kid. The skill building part of that is walk the route with them, help them find places that they can go to for help. Practice that dialogue. I'm lost. I need help. I can't find my mom, right? That is skill stuff. And we just bypass it because we think the tech will solve that. And it's not building a skill.
We have to teach our kids to rely also, like you mentioned, on other adults around us.
Yes.
Like there was one mom shared with me that, she's like, I maybe helicopter parented too long, and her daughter was 16 and they moved her to a pinwheel phone or one of the kids' safe phones, but it actually died on the way, her daughter's way to some appointment. And her daughter, you would think the child would stop at a gas station. She couldn't find where she was going. Stop at the gas station, ask someone for help. But her daughter didn't think to do that, or she was too embarrassed to do that. So we need to teach our kids from a young age. Like, I think that it can be confusing because there's a stranger danger element, but there's also, like, in your community, your kids should be able to trust an adult that is around them to help them.
I agree. And actually, I take I get mad about stranger danger because actually the biggest stranger danger is online. That's what's happening.
Right.
That's the harm.
Right.
The real world, we have to trust. Again, surveillance erodes trust, mistrust erodes trust, suspicion erodes trust. We need our children to trust people around them. And so if we, there's what you just said too, is just so striking that like even not knowing how to get somewhere without a device, getting lost while driving, like think about the situational awareness and the skills that come with like, if you're riding in a car and you're looking down at a phone the whole car ride, you have no idea how you got from point A to point B. Or riding the school bus, like how many kids are on the bus with devices. And yet there is a skill involved in sitting on a bus and looking out a window and learning about where you are and where you live and what the houses are and where the businesses are. And, you know, is it boredom? Maybe, but like, I don't know. Do you remember watching the raindrops run down the car window and like, being bored isn't bad. And we really need to think about what are the skills that we're not giving kids opportunities to build because we're displacing it with the tech. You know, again, it's like small things that build up.
Yeah. One of my favorite things is when I go on a longer car ride and there's like low music on, but all the kids are in the back and they're all just quietly looking out the window. And I think like, what are they thinking about? This is like so sweet that they're in their own thoughts.
Totally.
And they're just able to sit.
And they're having their own thoughts. That's the other thing is like, how often in our day do we let our own thoughts be the focus? Like we're so easily distracted and sucked in as adults, right? Like, so that's again a modeling thing too, that maybe you as a driver, you know, you're listening to music and you're quietly, you know, that's showing them that it's okay to do that, right? Like that it's normal.
Yeah. Okay. So let's get into some more advice.
Yeah.
So let's talk about when and how to introduce tech and screens. So my kids, we'll use me as an example. My kids are all under 9. They don't have any individual screen access. You know, at some point, I'm going to have to, I'm resisting as long as possible. But at some point, I'm going to have to teach them how to use tech intentionally. So what would you advise me on like when and how to start introducing screens with intention?
Yeah, that's a great question. And what I would like to say first is I wish that schools were able to provide a lot of this education. What I am seeing right now is it is tech for tech's sake, and it is not skill-based, and it's not scaffolded, and it is all tech before, I mean, you know, it's all backwards. And so I believe firmly there's a need for skills teaching in school, like old school computer lab. I mean, schools don't have computer labs anymore because the assumption is that children have one-to-one devices. When it comes to parenting and personal devices, I go back to my TLDR. Later is better and less is more. So obviously, as long as you can delay individual screen access. That is not always going to look the same for every family. There isn't one magic age because you could have a very mature 10-year-old and a really immature 16-year-old, right? And so the two questions I get asked the most are, how much screen time is too much and what parental controls do you recommend? And the two questions that I think are actually more useful to ask as a more protective approach, which is what I see as a tech intentional approach, is do I know what my child is doing online? And do I have a good relationship with them? And the first part of that, do I know what they're doing online, is going to happen before they have a device, whether it's through a school computer or a family device or picking up mom or dad's phone, family TV. They are exposed already to digital tech. It's almost impossible to exist without exposure, which is different than personal device. So the teaching has to start way, way early.
You're talking like when I'm at soccer practice last night and there's a 2-year-old and the mom gives the 2-year-old the device rather than taking them to the playground. That's right there.
Or even the 2-year-old watching the mom on the phone, right?
Right.
You know, it's again, it's that secondhand smoke effect, right? Like it's the exposure. We've talked about the modeling, what kids are seeing adults and other people doing, and the lack of, what's being displaced. And and so that's an important question is, I would say that for parents, it has to be ongoing conversations about digital tech all the time, even before they have a device, even before they have any sort of accounts or platforms. The second part of that is the relationship piece. I believe that the type of relationship, the quality of the relationship you have with your child will always trump any other sort of controls, limits, monitoring, rules, contracts. Doesn't mean those can't be a tool, one of many tools, but the relationship piece is so imperative because to the horrible stories that you hear, what we need are children that will know that they can come to us when, not if, when things go awry, when they see something inappropriate or scary or violent. And, you certainly covered the worst case, but we're talking there's thousands of smaller case scenarios that don't end in tragedy, but have deep impacts on children's psyches every day. And, I actually, here's an illustrative example. I had a Medium page where I wrote a lot of essays, and now it's just on my blog. But one essay I wrote several years ago, I think 3 or 4 years ago, was called "My Child Saw Porn on Their School Issued Device. What Do I Do?" And I wrote about a school in Austin, Texas that had this issue. That post, every week I get like, I don't write there anymore. I haven't written there in a couple of years. Every week I get like your most read posts. Every single week for the last several years, that post has between 20 and 50 new views. What that tells me is people are searching that up and finding my story. And that tells me that it's the thousands of paper cuts that are happening in between these horrific tragedies are really important to be paying attention to. So later is better, less is more. So that the piece of that, I mean, one of my favorite tips to give parents is save a tween, share a phone. So I actually don't think I made this in the book because it happened right after, but my kids are 16 and 13, and my daughter and I shared a phone. And actually we still do. I have an iPhone. And so she has access to an iPad at home. And so when her friends text her, it comes through both my phone and the iPad, but it feels like it's to her. And yet I can see it. Do I read all of her texts? Oh my gosh, no, because the inanity of, middle school group
I'm sure
chats.
There's hundreds.
Yeah. I mean, and the good news is her school has a no phone policy. So it makes my job as a parent so easy. And I'm going to say that out loud. I can't stress this enough, parents. If your school has a phone away for the day policy, that makes your job 50% easier. So kudos to the schools that are taking that. And it has to be bell to bell. No phones at lunch, no phones between classes. It has to be first bell to last bell to matter. So there's that. And then there's the phone alternatives, which I know you know a lot about. My daughter uses a light phone, which I don't endorse products, but it has been a tool that works. So as a communication device, I'm going to my friend's house. I'm taking the bus to the, shopping area. And that's it. That's all she needs. And it's forced her to have real world skill-based experiences because that's what I'm looking for as a parent. Does she know how to problem solve? Does she know how to ask other people or strangers for help? Does she know our address and our phone number? Can I just tell you how many children do not know their parents' phone numbers? And I bet if I asked you, you could rattle off a bunch of phone numbers from your childhood.
I know. All of them. My old boyfriend.
Exactly. So that's a skill. Like, why do we not teach phone numbers anymore?
I don't know. We can't only rely on technology. We have to be
exactly. There was a data breach recently at a school near me, or like a ransomware attack, and the article was like, teachers are pulling old projectors out of the closet and resorting to paper-based assignments. And I was like, this is amazing. We can do this.
Right.
So I'm not suggesting ransomware attacks are the solution to the EdTech problem, but it's possible. It's not that far back in our past that we made these things work. So anyway, different podcast.
I know. And I just a note on the light phone, because I tried it for a little bit, and the light phone is difficult to text. Like it takes a little longer to do things. But isn't that good?
I was going to say
tech right?
that is the best. So I have a Post-it note here, and your listeners won't be able to see it, but it says learning happens in the moments of friction. And technology is counter to that. Technology wants to make our life frictionless, but that is not what's better. That's exactly it. And actually my son used an old school flip phone when he was in middle school, and the predictive texting was so annoying. He didn't want to text very often. And I saw that as a victory. Like, great. Yeah.
Yeah. And one thing as a parent that I try to do is make my phone like harder to use.
Yes.
I don't have a case. I don't have a pop socket to make it easy for me to hold.
Yep.
I have that setting where if it gets too close to my face, it pauses and says I need to back it up. And that almost makes me put it down. Almost like,
I don't have that. I have one that if I double click, it goes black and white. Have you ever done?
Oh, that's good. Oh.
Or
do you triple?
Triple click. You have to set a shortcut feature. I think I may have a video on YouTube about it, but like making your phone, I mean, look how boring. It's like it hurts your eyes, so you don't want to scroll. So,
and even the watches, like I did use the Apple Watch for about a year or two, and I was like, I don't want to make this easier for people to get a hold of me.
Exactly.
I actually want it to engage more in real life.
Right.
So
exactly.
that went away
That's
too.
a great example. Yeah.
Yeah. There's so much more I want to talk about, but I want to make sure we get to talking about school tech, and you brought it up. I mean, I was just talking with my sister about it this morning, and one of the main reasons that schools, I feel like, are so reliant on the tech in school is because of the testing. They always say, well, we do testing on the tech, and I'm like, how long ago was it that we did testing other ways? Like, there's other ways to do the testing. You wrote in the book, quote, 10 days into kindergarten, our son did not know how to read or write, much more than his own name, but needed to learn how to log onto a computer to take a standardized test.
Yes.
And this was 11 years ago. 20.
Yeah.
So as a society, we've dove even further into relying on tech platforms for almost every single subject, starting in pre-K. My school district just announced, like with excitement, that they moved social and emotional learning onto the iPads, which I literally was in the board meeting, and I'm looking around and they're celebrating it, and I thought, oh my gosh. So I mean, if we back up, like, how has this reliance on tech in schools been good for our kids? Like,
it's not good. It's awful. It is a wolf in sheep's clothing. I say this all the time, that EdTech is just big tech in a sweater vest. They have the exact same business model. It's even more nefarious because it's cloaked in good. You know, who doesn't want to educate children? Don't you want your students to be 21st century humans? Don't you need skills of the future? I'm sorry, I'm calling big old BS on that, because the skills of the future, and you can look this up, like, yes, technological skills might be a part of it, but far more important are the executive function skills, right? Like planning, prioritizing, organization, communication, problem solving, empathy, relationships. It doesn't matter if you're the world's best coder or technologist. If you can't look me in the eye and communicate with me about a work problem, I'm not going to hire you. I mean, this is madness. All of the tech industry people, including, and I mean the ed tech industry, their kids go to Waldorf schools, nature-based, low-tech programs. They delayed access to digital tech. Why would they sell us something or push something into schools that they wouldn't let their own children use? That is unconscionable to me. And you are getting me very fired up about this because,
Emily, I mean, why? For money, right?
100%. It's a highly lucrative. And, you know, part of the problem is it's like, where do you come in at it? I mean, if we're talking kids are on screen 7.5 hours a day outside of school, and we add another 3 to 5 hours a day at school, that is madness. No one would say 10 hours a day is good for children on screens. It's not even good for adults. So that's mind-boggling to me. But that's one problem, the physical problem, right? We could talk about myopia. We could talk about posture. We could talk about fine motor, gross motor skills. Kids are not, you know, I go to a kindergarten, my friend sent me a picture of the kindergartners at the local public school. They are all sitting on the playground on their iPads before school starts instead of running around on the playground.
Oh,
madness.
What?
Madness.
Why are they in the classroom?
Well, because they go home with them, because it's the name of education.
Kindergarten?
Yes. Kindergarten.
Oh my God.
Kindergarten. And then we can even, you know, when we get really into the weeds, is the data privacy issues. So on average, and you can look this up on Internet Safety Labs, somewhere between 100 and 150 platforms per district, per school are being used, EdTech platforms. There is no way that a school has an idea of all of the different data that is being collected about your child on each of these individual platforms. And as a parent, I can guarantee you have no idea what's happening with that data, because the school might not even have an idea. And there's a lot of kick the can. There's a lot of like, oh, well, the EdTech company, they dispose of the data, or the EdTech company will say, oh, well, the schools hold the data. The reason, you know, most people's eyes glaze over when we talk about data, but here's the problem. Data is so valuable. It is the most lucrative part of this industry. And if you have data, you can sell it. And that's what's happening. They are selling children's data to ad tech and third-party companies to better design products to be more manipulative, compelling, and addictive for children. So we haven't even heard like the full scope of this, but it boils my blood.
Me too. So what do parents do? Can we opt out? Can we ask for more information about what platforms they're using? Like, what can we do?
Yes. And so you actually mentioned testing first. And what's really interesting is the opt-out of testing movement has been around a long time. That the amount of standardized tests that kids take today, and I'm speaking about public schools for the most part, but private schools do have a lot of issues with this as well. The number of standardized tests that children take has gone up a ton. And, there's a variety of reasons for that we don't have to go into today. Fundamentally, children need to take very few or none. In my view, as a former teacher, standardized tests measure one thing, how well you take a standardized test. So it is a data point, and the business decision makers of a school district might like that as a metric,
Sure.
But a school district or a school is not a business. Children are not widgets. They're not standardized. They need different things. Teachers should be allowed autonomy and creativity in the classroom. And the more you try to standardize it, the less they have of that, and that's what's happening with digital curricula. So that's a problem. Oh my gosh, I got so excited. I forgot what I was saying.
It's okay.
Oh yeah. What do we do about opting out? Yeah.
Yeah.
So first, if you're afraid to go full opt out of the school issued device, you can actually start by opting out of the testing. That isn't something people always think about first, but it actually has been around a lot longer and people have been doing it. And I actually was opting my kids out of testing before I opted them out of the school tech. And part of that is because, again, the tests are flawed. Where is that data going? Again, there's the academic tests, but there's also increasingly these youth mental health assessments, which I find mind-boggling. They tell you they are an anonymous mental health assessment. And look, I'm all in favor of assessing youth mental health. No question, it needs to be done. But what happens if a kid admits on this anonymous survey that they have suicidal ideation? How do you help them? Are you kidding me? You're going to ask them this question and then not be able to help them? So either it's not anonymous, which is deeply problematic, or you can't do anything. So I would opt out of the mental health assessments, number one, because that isn't the way to do it. The second one is there's Naviance, which is like college preparatory one. I don't know that it may only be high schoolers, but it might actually be middle schoolers too. It may be state dependent. That is not good. There's lots of problems with that. Then there's just the regular state standardized testing. The problem is a lot of funding is tied to testing, which is wrong. And I am not anti-funding of schools, right? I absolutely believe in it. But until enough parents say this is absurd, it won't change. But then the second part is if you want to push back on the tech for school, the iPad in kindergarten coming home with your child, you absolutely can and should. And in fact, I know you've interviewed Julie Liddell of EdTech Law Center. She has a parent's EdTech Bill of Rights that maps out what your rights are as a parent. And I highly encourage, I'll send you the link, or it's probably on our website, but we should put that in the show notes. But you have the right to do it. And I would argue, and we were talking about this before we started, that in a K through 5 setting, there is absolutely no benefit, reason, argument for a one-to-one device program. Now, one tiny asterisk to that might be for a child with a diagnosed learning disability for whom that is a tool. But that is the exception, not the rule. Just because one child in your class needs eyeglasses does not mean the entire class needs eyeglasses. And that's what's happening, right? We're just saying everybody gets eyeglasses. So you have the right to ask questions. Again, to go back to replacing judgment with curiosity, yes, I get really fired up about this, but a lot of the times it's not up to teachers, that they are between a rock and a hard place about this.
No, right.
And they're being told they have to use these tools, even if they don't want to or don't like them or see the problems. So I always encourage you to start with curiosity, asking questions of the teachers. Hey, how much are we using these iPads during the day? Do we have alternatives? The problem is if you offer alternatives, during free choice time, what kindergartner is going to pick blocks over an iPad? The blocks don't drive the same dopamine feedback loop. So that is a problem. So we have to look at that. I had a friend tell me that for kindergarten, her child's supposed to have an iPad. She asked the teacher, how often do you use the iPads? And the teacher said, we don't even touch them till January. To which I say, how many millions of dollars is the school district spending on these iPads that they're not even going to touch till January, right? You're having budget crisis, but you've got unused iPads. So it's madness is really what it is. And I want to speak truth to BS.
No. And I just want to inspire parents to ask questions.
Asking questions is absolutely the right place to start. I have this opt-out toolkit. So Unplug EdTech toolkit on my website for free to download that will walk parents through. There's a list of sample questions of what you can ask. There's a template of what letter if you decide to opt out. I really encourage parents to try to get a big picture because even within a school, different teachers are going to do different things differently. So you can ask the principal, but it may not be the same in each classroom. And so
it's not.
Right. And so that's why it's, again, nuance here, right? Like it's not going to be the same for every school, every teacher, every kid.
Yes. So every situation is different. And in my experience, it was the last couple of years building up to a full opt-out. But with my son, it was, hey, can we not give him the option? Like if he finishes early or there's downtime for the iPad. And that's hard for a kid with 33 students to implement. So and enforce.
And the burden is going to fall on teachers, and that's also wrong, right? Again, I get really mad about that.
Right. And my teacher's telling me, or our teacher's telling me that, okay, we'll tell your son about that. And he's just not going to choose a book over the iPad. It's just not going to happen. So it ended up with me having a conversation with the principal about how much screen time they're getting and the detriment of that. And then we made a deal that maybe they don't get over 20 minutes a day.
Right.
But then further on, I checked the device and found my daughter was being recommended a self-harm video. And then I am now fully opting out, to which the second grade class for my son just took it out of the classroom while they work on a more comprehensive plan. And for my daughter, they are still using it for short testing, which the teacher is telling me, she communicates with me about it. And that's our deal for now until I have a comprehensive
plan. And that's okay
to nuance, right?
Totally. And the other thing is so my daughter yesterday was like, we're doing this testing in school. I thought you opted me out. And I said, yep. And then I had this moment, I'm like, oh my gosh, she's in 7th grade. Should I not opt her out? Yeah. And I had to talk myself down. So I just want to say, if parents are like, but please remind yourself, go back to your 2nd grade year. Do you remember the testing that you did? I'm guessing not at all. Did it matter for your future career? No. So it's okay to trust that this is not actually an imperative part of their educational experience.
They might start remembering it because of how traumatic it is. The teachers are telling me that these district tests take some kids weeks, every day for weeks, and they're too hard, and the teachers hate them, and they're like, why are we doing this with 2nd, 3rd graders or kindergartners?
Oh boy, Nikki, we might have to have a whole nother interview.
I know. That's what I was like. I skipped a couple things earlier on because I was like, I got to get to this part of it.
Yeah.
Okay. So, for parents, knowing that every situation is different. So starting with the teacher, asking some questions about how much time they're getting. I also asked the principal. I went to the principal. What apps are my kids going to be using
great question.
this year? And then what data is going to be collected and who is that shared with?
Right.
That took a long time to get a response to which was not a full response because they don't know
exactly
where their data is being shared.
And you're legally entitled to that information.
Yeah. Yeah. Right. And to opt in for it.
Yes.
Correct?
Yes. Well, and not to get the districts off the hook. They're on Internet Safety Lab's website. There's something called the app microscope, and you can type in an EdTech app and it will give you a safety rating and it's a lot more sort of like SDKs and data privacy stuff. So it's a little bit in the weeds on the technological terms, but it's pretty easy to see how many, something like 96% of them are in the bad, don't use category. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. So you can, when you get those list of apps, which I did get, you can run them through that filter, or run them through that and see if you think that they're safe.
Mm-hmm.
And then have the courage to say, hey, I don't want my child to use, I don't find this to be safe, right? Whether that's which apps you don't like or how much time a day they spend. There's options for parents. And I think we just need to know we can speak up about it.
100%. And you're right. I want to say that. I want to validate parents are right to question this. And I would, again, I always approach this with, you can be polite and firm and clear. I would also ask the school to provide the research that justifies it. What I feel like often happens is we have to defend why it's bad, but they're not defending why it's good. And that is fundamentally a problem. And you have to be specific and say, I want to see the independent research, because they may pull up the studies that are funded by the tech industry that of course say these platforms are good for kids, and they're not.
Right.
So it's okay to ask for that. It's okay that this might take time. It's okay that there's compromise first. We also have to talk to our kids about it. Like you said, it can be pretty isolating if you're the only kid. I mean, that's my daughter this year is the only kid without a laptop in a 7th grade of 350 kids. And we have had to have lots of conversations about what that's like. But get this, even though the science and math curriculum are 100% digital, her teachers have both said that they prefer penciled anyway, which means to me that the teachers don't like it. And the second thing is I asked her, I was like, do you really miss not having it? Has it been a problem? And she's like, no, not really. My hand just hurts from writing more. To which I said, great, that's what school should be. So it can work. I mean, don't give up hope that it's all going to be bad. You might be met with resistance, but you might not.
Right. Yeah. And I think, preparing your child, like why you're making that decision for my 2nd and 3rd grader, they know that they're safer by not having access to the device. Yeah. And that they're, it's helping their brain develop and helping their handwriting. And they actually kind of they feel like a special one. Yeah. And especially my 2nd grader loves that he gets to read more. He loves reading. And so it doesn't mean that they're going to be feeling left out in a bad way.
No, exactly.
Spin it to be a positive thing. And then when I have my official plan that I'm in writing, that I've signed off on for their opt-out, guess what? All the parents in the classes are going to hear about it and hopefully be able to follow along and opt in for it.
And that's
their choice.
And that's what it's going to take to change things. And I don't know if you got all the way to the epilogue of my book, but there is the anecdote I write about being a school of fish. And how does a school of fish know when to change direction in an ocean? And it starts with one fish peeling away from the group. But it actually takes a 2nd and a 3rd fish to join them before the whole school of fish will join.
Right.
Isn't that great? So you're a first fish, and we need other first fish, but we also need 2nd and 3rd fish. So that's exactly it. That maybe the parents of your child's classmates going to be like, oh, I didn't even know I could do that. Well, I want that too. And it's like, I think of it as like a Jenga tower. We're just pulling these blocks out one at a time to topple that tower.
Yeah. And it's all for the safety of our kids and helping our kids have this experience in school that is beneficial to them and not harmful. And
exactly.
Okay. Yes. So tell listeners quickly about your where they can reach you and find all your resources.
Yes. Well, ironically, I have an online presence. So my website is thescreentimeconsultant.com. I have my book, which can be bought anywhere.
I have it too.
Oh, yay. The Screentime Solution, a judgment-free guide to becoming a tech-intentional family.
So good.
Thank you.
So good.
Yes, thank you. So you can buy that anywhere. And then on my website, I have under resources, the EdTech Toolkit, Unplug EdTech Toolkit. And I really encourage people to sign up for my newsletter. It's, again, I don't spam you or sell your email address, but I send weekly essays about parenting, tech, EdTech. And then a lot of those essays end up on my blog as well. So if you want to go and search for EdTech, there's a lot of resources there as well. So, and I do have a social media presence, ironically, duly noted. So Instagram.
I know. But that's where we reach parents who are actually also interested in these topics.
And that's how I found you. Fine. So it's, there is some good that comes from it. And we're both adults. So it's different. Yeah.
Yeah. So we're going to have more conversations, I have a feeling. I want to talk about the Power School situation and dig into that a little bit more for parents. And Julie did a great job. Julie Liddell, in my interview with her, breaking down the data piece and why that's so important. So parents should understand that.
Yeah.
And okay, but thank you for all of your work.
So welcome.
I know it takes courage to be that first fish and make this positive change. So thank you for doing that and for being like a role model in this space and speaking up for our kids.
Well, thank you, and thank you for using your platform to spread such important information for parents. I really appreciate it.
I try.
We got to keep chipping away.
I know.
Thank
you, Emily.
You're so welcome. Thanks, Nikki.